They say hearing is the last sense to go. They were right. As I lay trapped in a cold, dark void, the rhythmic beep of my life support was drowned out by my wife's whisper. "Just let him die, Charles. The money is gone anyway." She was wrong about the money, 850 million times wrong. My name is Andrew Harrington. Up until November 12th, 2023, I believed I had achieved the quintessential American dream. I was 52 years old, living in a sprawling estate in Carmel by the Sea, California. I was married to a woman I thought was my soulmate, Emily, and I generously supported my younger brother, Charles, despite his chronic inability to hold down a job. I was the founder and CEO of Vanguard Freight, a logistics company I had built from a single, leased delivery truck into a West Coast powerhouse. But the trucking industry is brutal. The margins are razor thin, and the stress is a heavy, suffocating blanket. To the outside world, and more importantly, to my family, Vanguard Freight was struggling. For the past year, I had been playing the part of a stressed, debt-ridden executive on the verge of bankruptcy. I complained about fuel costs, slashed my own salary, and even put a halt to Emily's lavish spending sprees at Neiman Marcus and Cartier. What Emily and Charles didn't know was that Vanguard's physical trucks were just a front for my real life's work. For a decade, I had been secretly developing a proprietary AI routing algorithm that could predict supply chain disruptions globally with a 98% accuracy rate. It was a piece of software that major tech conglomerates would kill for. On November 10th, 2023, I sold the intellectual property to a multinational tech giant under a strict non-disclosure agreement. The payout? $850 million, transferred cleanly into an irrevocable private trust stationed in Delaware, managed by my fiercely loyal attorney, Oliver Smith. I didn't tell Emily. I didn't tell Charles. I wanted to see if they loved the man, or if they only loved the ATM he represented, especially after I announced that Vanguard was officially filing for Chapter 11. I never got the chance to test my theory consciously. 2 days after the ink dried on the sale, I was driving down the Pacific Coast Highway in the pouring rain. A commercial logging truck blew a tire, crossed the double yellow line, and hit my SUV head-on. The police report later stated that my vehicle rolled 3 times before wrapping around a massive redwood. I don't remember the impact. My next memory is a sensation of drowning in a sea of molasses. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt as though they were fused shut. I tried to scream, but there was a thick, plastic tube shoved down my throat, forcing air into my lungs in a harsh, mechanical rhythm. Hiss, click, beep. I was entirely paralyzed, suffering from a severe traumatic brain injury that plunged me into a state of locked-in syndrome. To the monitors, to the doctors, and to my family, I was in a deep, unresponsive coma. But inside my shattered skull, my mind was screamingly awake. I could feel the scratchy hospital sheets. I could smell the sharp tang of iodine and floor wax. And, God help me, I could hear everything. It started on what I guessed was my 3rd day in the intensive care unit at St. Jude's Medical Center. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, and the scent of Emily's expensive Tom Ford perfume wafted over my bed. I felt a surge of relief. My wife was here. She would hold my hand. She would tell me to fight. Instead, I heard the rustle of paperwork and the heavy sigh of my brother, Charles. "Doctor, Evans said the brain activity is minimal, Emily," Charles murmured, his voice lacking even a trace of sorrow. "He's functionally gone. Are you sure?" Emily's voice was crisp, entirely devoid of the tears I had expected, because if he wakes up a vegetable, the medical care will drain whatever is left of the estate. And, you know as well as I do, Vanguard is bankrupt. I saw the Chapter 11 filings on his desk the morning of the crash. My heart rate monitor must have spiked, but the machine's warning beep was quickly silenced by a nurse who adjusted my IV. I was screaming inside, "I'm in here! I can hear you!" The bankruptcy was a shield. "We need to be practical," Charles continued, his tone turning conspiratorial. "The life insurance policy is only for $2 million. If he stays in this ICU, that money will be eaten up in 6 months. We need to petition the court for conservatorship immediately. We can liquidate the Carmel house, take the insurance payout, and move on. Move on, Emily repeated, tasting the words. He always was a stubborn bastard, Charles, working himself to the bone for a company that ended up failing anyway, leaving me with a mess to clean up. I felt her manicured fingers brush against my forearm, not with affection, but with the clinical detachment of a butcher examining meat. We talk to the lawyers tomorrow, Emily said coldly. We pull the plug. If the hospital refuses because he's breathing over the ventilator, we transfer him to a state facility, the cheapest one we can find. I am not spending the best years of my life wiping drool from the chin of a bankrupt ghost. The door clicked open, then shut. They were gone. Lying in the sterile darkness, my grief metastasized into a burning, white-hot rage. My wife of 15 years, my own blood brother. They had mentally buried me before my body was even cold, purely because they thought the gravy train had derailed. They didn't care about the man who had loved them, sheltered them, and forgiven their endless flaws. They wanted me dead to save $2 million. They had no idea I was sitting on nearly $1 billion, and in the silent prison of my own body, I made a vow I was going to survive this. And when I did, I was going to destroy them. The next 3 months were an excruciating exercise in psychological torture. Time lost its meaning, measured only by the changing shifts of the nursing staff and the episodic visits from Emily and Charles, which grew increasingly rare and infinitely more cruel. True to her word, Emily had swiftly moved to take control. Through the fog of my paralysis, I listened as she and Charles brought a sleazy estate lawyer into my hospital room. Because my condition remained unchanged, a Glasgow Coma scale of 3, totally unresponsive, the courts easily granted Emily full conservatorship over my medical and financial decisions. I listened, trapped and silent, as she authorized the sale of my vintage car collection at a fraction of its value just to get quick cash. I listened as Charles casually mentioned moving into my home office, drinking my expensive scotch, and wearing my custom-tailored suits. But the ultimate betrayal came in week 12. The hospital administration informed Emily that my insurance had capped out for acute ICU care. I needed to be moved to a long-term facility. Dr. Evans, a kind man who always spoke to me as if I could hear him, recommended a specialized neurological rehabilitation center in San Francisco. The cost is roughly $20,000 a month. Mrs. Harrington, Dr. Evans explained, his voice gentle. But they have state-of-the-art therapies. If Andrew has any chance of waking up, it's there. $20,000 a month? Emily scoffed. It was the loudest I had heard her speak in weeks. Absolutely not. The estate is tied up in probate from the bankruptcy, doctor. We don't have that kind of money. There are alternative options, Dr. Evans said, his tone cooling significantly. But the quality of care, find the cheapest state-run facility that will accept Medicare, Emily interrupted. Andrew wouldn't want to be a financial burden. Put him in Oak Creek. Even the doctor inhaled sharply. I knew of Oak Creek. It was a notoriously underfunded, dilapidated warehouse for the forgotten elderly and the terminal. It was a place where people went to rot. 2 days later, I was strapped to a gurney and loaded into a rattling transport ambulance. The smooth, sanitized smell of street Jude's was replaced by the suffocating stench of bleach, boiled cabbage, and stale urine. I was dumped into a cramped, windowless room with a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed incessantly. For the first month at Oak Creek, no one came to visit me. My existence was reduced to being turned every 4 hours by overworked, apathetic orderlies to prevent bed sores. I was tube-fed gray slurry. I was a corpse with a pulse. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Emily finally visited, but she wasn't alone. I heard heavy, unfamiliar footsteps enter the room alongside the sharp click of her designer heels. God, the smell in here is revolting, a male voice said. I instantly recognized it. Rowan. Rowan Smith, a flashy, aggressively mediocre real estate developer from our country club, a man I had always despised. I know, darling, I'm sorry, Emily cooed. Darling, the word hit me like a physical blow. I just needed to drop off the final insurance forms with the front desk. I wouldn't have brought you in here, but I didn't want to leave you in the car. He looks terrible, Rowan noted, standing near the foot of my bed. Like a skeleton. How long did the doctors say he has? Months. Maybe a year if his heart holds out, Emily replied dismissively. I felt her hand on my left arm. She was fumbling with my ring finger. With a sharp tug, she pulled off my heavy gold wedding band. No sense in leaving this here for some minimum wage nurse to steal, she muttered. Let's go, Evie, Rowan said. Our flight to Cabo is in 4 hours, and I want to hit the lounge first. Coming. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out, taking my ring, my dignity, and the last shred of my humanity with her. It was in that absolute, crushing darkness that a profound shift occurred within me. The despair that had been drowning me suddenly evaporated, replaced by an inferno of pure, unadulterated willpower. I was not going to die in this squalid room. I was not going to let Emily and Charles spend my life insurance while sipping margaritas in Mexico. The human brain is a terrifyingly powerful engine when fueled by vengeance. I began my silent war. I focused every ounce of my consciousness on my right index finger. For weeks, nothing happened. I pushed against the invisible wall of my damaged nervous system until I felt like my brain would hemorrhage. And then, one evening, during the graveyard shift, it happened. A young night nurse named Abigail Brooks was checking my vitals. She was humming a soft tune, gently wiping my face with a warm washcloth. She was the only person in this hellhole who treated me like a human being. I focused on the warmth of her hand. I screamed at my nerves, "Move, move, move!" My right index finger twitched. Abigail froze. She stared at my hand. "Mr. Harrington?" she whispered. I gathered every microscopic drop of energy left in my ruined body. I twitched the finger again. Twice. I heard a sharp gasp. Abigail dropped the washcloth and leaned over my face, her eyes wide, searching mine. "Andrew, if you can hear me, blink twice." It felt like lifting a pair of anvils, but I forced my eyelids down. Once, twice. Abigail burst into tears. Oh my God, you're in there. You're awake. Don't tell my family, I wanted to say, but my vocal cords were dead. I just stared at her, pleading with my eyes. She seemed to understand the terror in my gaze. She didn't call the doctor. She didn't hit the emergency alarm. She leaned in close. "I've read your chart, Andrew. I know who dumped you here. I know no one comes. You're safe. I'm going to help you." The next day, under Abigail's careful, secret supervision, I began the agonizing journey of communicating. Using an alphabet board she smuggled in, I painstakingly blinked out my first message, letter by letter. Chi-L-O-O-L-I-V-E-R-A-S-T-L-I-N-G. When my attorney, Oliver, walked into my dingy room 3 days later, he wept. He had been stonewalled by Emily and Charles, barred from seeing me, unable to execute the trust because I was neither legally dead nor mentally competent. As Oliver stood beside my bed, looking at the broken shell of the man he had known, I blinked out my next set of instructions. FUND-MYRECOVERYINSECRET THEYEAM Oliver wiped his eyes, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He understood. The $850 million ghost was waking up, and hell was coming with him. Extracting a medically fragile, legally incapacitated man from the grip of a greedy conservator requires a masterpiece of legal and financial deception. Fortunately, my attorney, Oliver Smith, was a master of both. With $850 million sitting untouched in a Delaware trust, Oliver had the infinite resources required to build an illusion. We couldn't legally challenge Emily's conservatorship without revealing I was conscious, which would immediately alert her to the incoming storm. Instead, Oliver exploited her two greatest weaknesses, her profound laziness and her insatiable greed. 3 weeks after my breakthrough with Nurse Abigail, Oliver presented Emily with an incredibly lucrative solution to my continued existence. He created a shell corporation that supposedly represented an experimental, privately funded palliative care initiative based in Colorado. Through back channels, this organization offered to take me off Emily's hands completely. They would absorb all medical costs, legally absolve her of any financial liability regarding my end-of-life care, and even offer a modest participation stipend of $50,000 for allowing me to be part of their clinical trial. Emily didn't even read the transfer documents. Oliver later told me she signed them on the patio of the country club, a mimosa in one hand and a gold pen in the other, without asking a single question about where I was going or what they would do to me. She was just thrilled to be legally washed of the burden and handed $50,000 for her trouble. 24 hours later, I was airlifted out of the squalor of Oak Creek on a medically equipped Gulfstream jet. My destination was not a state-run hospice, but a secluded, ultra-luxurious private rehabilitation compound nestled deep in the mountains of Aspen. It was there that the real agony began. Surviving locked-in syndrome is a miracle. Recovering from it is a war. My body had wasted away into a skeletal cage of atrophied muscle and stiffened joints. The lead physician at the Aspen facility, Dr. Harrison Caldwell, warned me that the road ahead would break me down before it built me back up. He wasn't exaggerating. For the first 4 months, my world was a torturous cycle of painful physical therapy, electrical muscle stimulation, and grueling speech exercises. Relearning how to swallow solid food felt like swallowing crushed glass. Forcing my legs to bear weight sent shockwaves of blinding pain up my spine. My vocal cords, scarred from months of intubation, refused to produce anything more than a wet, pathetic rasp. There were nights I lay in my plush, high-tech hospital bed, weeping from the sheer physical agony, wondering if the revenge was worth the torment. But then, Oliver would visit, bringing with him the thick dossiers that fueled my fire. While I was bleeding and sweating in a Colorado gymnasium, learning how to hold a spoon again, my family was busy tearing my legacy apart. Oliver's private investigators documented every sickening detail. Charles had completely run Vanguard Freight into the ground. Rather than trying to save the company through the Chapter 11 process, he had quietly embezzled whatever operational capital remained, funneling it into offshore accounts to fund his gambling habits. Vanguard's loyal employees, people I had known for a decade, were laid off without severance. Emily, meanwhile, was living openly with Rowan. They had liquidated the remaining assets from my estate, including the $2 million life insurance advance they managed to secure under the pretense of my terminal vegetative state. But $2 million doesn't last long when you have a taste for private jets, custom jewelry, and Rowan's failing business ventures. Rowan, it turned out, was a fraud. His real estate development empire was a massive house of cards built on toxic debt and predatory loans. He was bleeding cash, and he was dragging Emily down with him. They were living in my Carmel-by-the-Sea estate, throwing lavish parties to project an image of wealth, while silently drowning in final notices and foreclosure threats. They were vultures feasting on what they thought was a carcass. They had no idea the carcass was watching them, growing stronger every single day. By month 10, the tide turned. The agonizing spasms in my legs gave way to steady steps. The wet rasp in my throat deepened into a harsh, commanding baritone different from my old voice, colder, with a permanent gravelly edge. I still required a custom silver-handled cane to walk, my left leg bearing permanent nerve damage from the crash, but I was no longer a victim. I was an architect of ruin. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Aspen suite, watching the snow fall over the pines, holding a tumbler of expensive bourbon. I had hired Abigail Brooks, the nurse who saved me, as my private director of medical care, paying her a salary that ensured she would never have to work a night shift in a state facility again. Oliver sat on the leather sofa behind me, shuffling a stack of legal briefs. "I'm ready, Oliver," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a serrated blade. "It's time to tighten the noose. Revenge, when executed properly, should not be a sudden explosion. It should be a slow, methodical suffocation. I didn't just want to take my money and reveal I was alive. I wanted to systematically dismantle the lives Emily, Charles, and Rowan had built on the foundation of my supposed demise. I wanted them to willingly hand me the keys to their destruction. Working from my Aspen compound, I utilized a fraction of my $850 million war chest to establish Aegis Capital, a shadowy, aggressive private equity firm based in New York. I installed Oliver as the public-facing CEO, while I operated as the invisible, controlling shareholder. Our first target was my brother, Charles. The bankruptcy courts were finally closing in on his embezzlement of Vanguard Freight's assets. Facing federal fraud charges and severe prison time, Charles was desperately seeking a massive, uncollateralized loan to quietly pay back the creditors before the Department of Justice got involved. Traditional banks laughed him out of their lobbies. Aegis Capital did not laugh. We approached him through a third-party broker, offering a $5 million lifeline. The terms, however, were brutally draconian. In exchange for the cash, Charles had to sign over complete legal ownership of his remaining personal assets, sign a confession of judgment that bypassed any trial if he defaulted, and legally bind himself to a mountain of personal liability. Desperate, terrified of prison, and blinded by his own arrogance, Charles signed the paperwork without hesitation. He took the money, paid off the immediate hounds, and believed he had outsmarted the system. In reality, he had just signed his soul over to a holding company I controlled entirely. Next came Rowan and Emily. Rowan's flagship project, a massive, bloated luxury waterfront development in Monterey, was facing catastrophic failure. His primary lenders were calling in their loans, threatening to foreclose on the property and seize all collateral, which included the Carmel by the Sea estate that Emily had illegally pledged against his debts. They were weeks away from total, humiliating bankruptcy. Oliver, wearing an immaculate bespoke suit and playing the role of the ruthless Wall Street savior, flew to California to meet with them. He offered Rowan a $50 million bridge loan to finish the Monterey project and save his empire. I listened to the audio recording of the meeting later that night. The desperation in Rowan's voice was palpable. The greed in Emily's voice was sickening. "What are the terms, Mr. Smith?" Rowan had asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Aegis Capital takes a 60% controlling stake in the Monterey development," Oliver replied smoothly. "Furthermore, we require full, unconditional personal guarantees from both you and your soon-to-be wife, Mrs. Harrington. If the project fails to meet our required revenue benchmarks within 90 days, we seize everything. The properties, the bank accounts, the vehicles, everything." It was a financial suicide pact. Anyone with a shred of business acumen would have walked away. But Rowan was a narcissist who believed his own hype, and Emily was terrified of losing her country club status. "We'll do it," Emily had said on the recording. "The project will succeed. We have nothing to worry about." "Excellent," Oliver said. "Our silent partner, the majority owner of Aegis Capital, insists on meeting all principal signers in person to finalize a deal of this magnitude. He is a very private man. He requests that the final contract signing take place at a private, secure location. Your estate in Carmel, perhaps?" "Of course." "We would be honored," Emily gushed. And so the stage was set. 16 months to the day after the logging truck shattered my life, I stood in front of a full-length mirror in a luxury hotel suite in Monterey. The man staring back at me was unrecognizable from the stressed, exhausted freight executive I used to be. I was leaner, my face hardened by pain and etched with faint scars along my jawline. My hair had gone silver at the temples. I wore a tailored, charcoal-gray Tom Ford suit that hid the bracing on my left leg. I gripped my silver-handled cane, feeling the solid, reassuring weight of it in my palm. Oliver stood by the door, holding the thick, leather-bound portfolio containing the final, ruinous contracts. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. "They're expecting us at 8, Andrew," Oliver said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Charles is already there. Emily hired a private chef. They are celebrating. They think tonight is the night they are saved." "They are celebrating my funeral," I replied, my voice a low rumble. "They just don't realize the corpse is picking up the tab." We descended to the underground garage, where a black, armored Maybach was waiting. The drive to Carmel took 40 minutes. I watched the dark, rolling waves of the Pacific Ocean crash against the cliffs, feeling a cold, crystalline calm wash over me. The rage that had sustained me in that squalid hospital room had condensed into pure, unyielding ice. As the Maybach turned onto the winding, private driveway of my own estate, I saw the lights blazing from the massive windows. I saw Rowan's leased Bentley parked by the fountain. I saw the silhouette of Emily in the living room, holding a glass of champagne, laughing at something Charles had said. The car glided to a halt in front of the grand oak double doors. Oliver stepped out first, adjusting his tie. He walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. I stayed in the shadows of the back seat, waiting. The heavy door swung open. Emily stood there, draped in a backless silk gown I had bought her for our 10th anniversary, a brilliant, practiced smile plastered across her face. "Mr. Smith," she chimed, stepping aside. "Please, come in. We've been waiting for you. Is your silent partner with you?" Oliver smiled a terrifying, predatory grin. "He is Mrs. Harrington. He's been looking forward to this meeting for a very, very long time." Oliver turned toward the Maybach and gave a brief, subtle nod. I opened the door, planted my cane on the cobblestone driveway, and stepped out into the light. The cane struck the cobblestone with a sharp, echoing crack. I stepped out of the shadows and into the warm, golden light spilling from the foyer of my own home. I didn't rush. I let my altered, hardened appearance register in Emily's eyes piece by piece. The silver hair at my temples, the tailored suit, the cold, dead stare of a man who had clawed his way back from the abyss. Emily's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering against the imported Italian marble floor. The vintage Dom Perignon pooled around her designer heels. "Good evening, Emily," I said. My voice, ruined by the ventilator and rebuilt through sheer grit, was a low, gravelly rasp that seemed to vibrate the glass in the doorframe. "I believe I am late for my own funeral." "Andrew?" she choked out, her face draining of all color, turning a sickly, translucent white. Her hands began to tremble violently. "Andrew, you're dead." "The facility. They said you were transferred to a terminal ward." "A terminal ward you sold me to for $50,000, I corrected, stepping past her into the grand foyer. I breathed in the familiar scent of the house I had built. A rather cheap price for a husband's life. Wouldn't you agree? "Evie, who is at the door?" Charles's voice echoed from the formal dining room. He rounded the corner, holding a crystal decanter of my favorite Macallan Scotch. He stopped dead. The decanter slipped, but he managed to catch it against his chest, spilling amber liquid down the front of his silk shirt. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, backing away as if I were a demon summoned from hell. "Andrew?" Rowan appeared behind him, looking annoyed and utterly confused. He had never met me, only seen older, heavier photographs. "What is going on here?" "Evie, who is this?" "Rowan." Oliver stepped in, his tone entirely devoid of the warmth he had projected just days prior. "Allow me to formally introduce you to the majority shareholder and CEO of Aegis Capital, Andrew Harrington." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of three worlds simultaneously collapsing. "Let's go to the dining room," I commanded, bypassing them. I walked with a pronounced limp, my cane thudding rhythmically against the hardwood, but I moved with the undeniable authority of a predator who had cornered its prey. I took my seat at the head of the long mahogany table. Oliver flanked me, opening his leather briefcase and extracting the towering stacks of contracts they had so eagerly signed. Emily, Charles, and Rowan slowly followed, taking their seats like prisoners being led to the gallows. Emily was openly weeping now, tears ruining her immaculate makeup. "Andrew, honey," Emily stammered, reaching a trembling hand toward me. "We thought, the doctors said you were brain dead. We were just trying to survive. We lost everything when Vanguard went bankrupt. I loved you." "Do not insult my intelligence, Emily." I cut her off, my voice cracking like a whip. I was locked in. "I heard every word you and Charles said in that ICU. I felt you pull my wedding ring off my finger in that squalid, rotting room at Oak Creek so you could go to Cabo with the man sitting next to you." Rowan swallowed hard, his bravado completely evaporating. "Mr. Harrington, look, whatever your personal issues are with Emily, this is a business meeting. We have a legally binding $50 million bridge loan agreement with Aegis Capital." "Yes, you do," Oliver said, sliding a red folder across the table toward Rowan. "And if you had bothered to have competent legal counsel review the addendums, you would have noticed the covenant clauses. The loan required your Monterey project to pass an independent structural and financial audit by noon today. You failed on both counts. Your foundations are sinking, and your ledgers are fraudulent." Rowan's face flushed purple. "That's a lie. We have 90 days. "You had 90 days to meet revenue benchmarks," Oliver corrected coldly. "You had 24. As of 5 p.m. today, Aegis Capital exercised its right to seize all cross-collateralized assets. That includes the Monterey development, your personal bank accounts, and," Oliver tapped the table, "this house, which Emily illegally leveraged." Emily let out a sharp, breathless sob. "You can't do this, Andrew. This is my home. I'm your wife." "You are a conservator who abandoned her ward," I said, leaning forward, resting my hands on the silver handle of my cane. "My attorneys filed the annulment and fraud charges this morning. You have nothing." Charles, who had been staring at the table in catatonic shock, finally spoke. "Andrew, please. I'm your brother. The Vanguard bankruptcy." I panicked. "I took some money to cover debts, but I was going to pay it back with the Aegis loan. You can't ruin me." "I didn't ruin you, Charles. You ruined yourself." I looked at the man I had protected my entire life, feeling nothing but a profound, icy emptiness. "You embezzled $3 million from my employees' pension funds. The $5 million loan Aegis gave you yesterday? It was wired directly to a secure holding account. You never had access to it, but your confession of judgment is fully executed." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. Then I delivered the final, crushing blow. "The tragedy of all this," I said softly, looking at Emily and Charles, "is how cheaply you sold your souls. You left me to rot in a state-run nightmare over a $2 million life insurance policy. You thought Vanguard Freight was a failure. You thought I was bankrupt." I looked at Oliver. He smiled and handed me a single sheet of paper, a redacted bank statement from the Delaware Trust. I tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table. "Vanguard was a shell," I explained, watching their eyes dart to the paper. "A front for a proprietary logistics algorithm I spent a decade building. 2 days before the crash, I sold that intellectual property." Charles leaned forward, his eyes scanning the numbers on the paper. His jaw dropped. A terrifying, strangled noise escaped his throat. $850 million, Charles whispered, the words sounding like ash in his mouth. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a madness born of pure, unadulterated regret. Emily stared at the paper. 800 million? She looked at me, then at the squalor of Rowan's failed promises, and finally realized the magnitude of her miscalculation. She had thrown away a dynasty for a doomed con man. She screamed a visceral, tearing sound of absolute agony. She fell to her knees, clutching at my pant leg. "Andrew, please! I'm sorry! I'll do anything, please!" I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I just looked down at her. "Get your hands off me," I said quietly. She scrambled back, terrified by the absolute void in my eyes. "The local authorities are waiting at the bottom of the driveway," Oliver announced, checking his watch. "Charles, they have warrants for your arrest regarding the federal embezzlement charges. Rowan, Emily, you have exactly 10 minutes to vacate this property before you are arrested for criminal trespassing. You will leave with the clothes on your backs. Everything else inside this house belongs to Aegis." "You're a monster," Rowan spat, standing up, his fists clenched. "No," I replied, rising slowly, leaning heavily on my cane. "I am simply the ghost you created. Now, get out of my house." They left. Charles walked out like a dead man, his wrists soon to be in handcuffs. Rowan stormed out, shouting empty threats into the night. Emily was the last to leave, sobbing hysterically, casting one final, desperate look back at the empire she had forfeited. When the heavy oak doors finally clicked shut, the silence returned to the estate. But it was no longer the suffocating silence of a hospital room. It was the silence of a clean slate. "Well done, Andrew," Oliver said quietly, packing his briefcase. I walked over to the grand window, looking out over the dark Pacific Ocean. The storm had passed. The moon was breaking through the clouds, casting a silver path across the water. I had lost a brother and a wife, but I had found something far more valuable, my own unyielding strength. Life moved forward. Charles is serving 10 years in federal prison. Emily and Rowan are bankrupt, entangled in endless litigation. As for me, I established a foundation with Abigail Brooks to fund neurological rehabilitation for the abandoned and forgotten. I lost my family to greed, but surviving the darkness taught me that true wealth isn't just in a trust fund, it's in the loyalty of those who stand by your bed when the monitors fade.